everybody, and welcome to Chapter 21 on animal structure and function. So this is kind of a topic that we've been mentioning over the semester, especially when it comes to proteins, right? The protein's function depends on its structure. And you can kind of think of that as like the human body as well, at least an animal body. Each one of our structures has a very specific function. And that's what we're going to be talking about today and getting into with Chapter 21. So, first of all, when we look at this, we remember we have to look at a certain hierarchy. So what we're going to do is we're going to go from the very small to the very big. Okay, so we're going to start out at the cellular level, so a single cell. In this case, we're looking at a single muscle cell, right? So we have a single muscle cell together. When you take all the different muscle cells together, then you're going to actually form the tissue. So remember, this is way early on in the semester we did this, and we actually went from the smallest atomic level to the actual biosphere. We're going to simplify this a little bit and just stick with the organisms. But we are going from the cellular level to the organismal level. That would just be the individual organism. So you have the single cell. You take a bunch of those cells that are the same type and you put them together. Now you have a tissue, like our muscle tissue, right? You get all of those things together, all those tissues together to actually form an organ, right? That's going to be your organ. So in this case, the heart. So that would be the organ level. As we continue on, then you can actually have things like the organ system level. So if we're talking about the heart, we're talking about the circulatory system, right? That's our blood flowing all throughout our body, circulating our fluids, right? And then if you take every single organ system, like our reproductive system and our circulatory system and our nervous system and all of the systems in our body, then you actually get the organism. Okay, so that is a single organism. That is an entire organism. So we went from the single cell. We had a bunch of cells of the same type that form our tissue, like our muscles, right? That tissue is going to form an organ, either our skin or our heart or our stomach or whatever other organ we're talking about. That's going to be at the organ level. If you talk about all of those organs that work and interlock and function with each other, in this case the heart, you talk about the circulatory system. That would be the organ system. So that would be the heart and the blood and the lungs and the everything that's going along all here, all the veins and the arteries. That's our organ system. If you talk about all the organ systems in our body, then finally you have the organism level, right? That individual person, that a single organism. All right, so let's talk about tissues. We know that tissues are made up of cells, right? But they're actually made up of the same type of cells. So all muscle cells are going to look basically the same because it's the same type of cell that's going to make up our tissue. And our tissue level in this case is going to be the muscles. Okay, so it's basically the cell is the smallest unit of our body, right? So we're not talking atomically, like if you actually break down the cells into their individual pieces. We're just talking about a single unit. So our cell is going to be the smallest single unit. Now we are multicellular. So, right, we're going to have lots of different types of cells making up our body, including our skin cells, our muscle cells, our connective tissues, all these other different types of cells that we're going to be talking about in the next couple, this lecture and the next couple lectures. The next 2 lectures. 1 or 2 lectures, I can't remember. All right, so when you're talking about a tissue, you're talking about an integrated network of cells that are all working together for some singular purpose. So if I'm talking about the cardiac cells in my heart, right, their whole job is just to contract and to beat and to keep my heart pumping, which is going to keep me alive. Okay, so that is their sole purpose, would be to beat. If we're talking about the muscles, my sole purpose is to be able to move, right? I need to go out and find food. How do you do that? You do that with your muscle cells, right? That's actually going to get you out walking to the store or whatever to go buy your groceries, in this case, because we don't hunt anymore. So we do have 4 different types of cells that we're going to be focusing on in this class. And yes, you do need to know the differences between these cells, but like a generalized, like broad, like what's the big differences between these types of cells? Like we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of it, but I do want you guys to understand the differences between these 4 different types of cells. So the first one is the epithelial cells. We're going to talk about those, connective tissues, muscle tissues, and then finally nervous tissues. Okay, so starting with our germ layers, we do have 3 different layers. We have the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. You can kind of look at this as like the outside, the top layer, and this would be like the bottom layer. So starting with the ectoderm, again, derm kind of means like skin or covering. So we're talking about our ectoderm. So this is our outer covering. This is our top layer, our ectoderm. So this is what you can see right here on my arm. We'll be looking at the ectoderm. And the ectoderm basically has your skin cells, some neurons, and some pigment cells. This is what gives you a nice tan. Again, some of these skin cells are going to have things like sweat glands, which are going to allow you to do cooling and stuff like that, which we're also going to talk about. But this is like your outer layer of skin here. Now, if we were to move deeper and deeper and deeper, right, now you're actually going to get some of in your mesoderm or your middle layer. This is where you're going to get lots of connective tissue. You're going to get bones, cartilage, blood. This is kind of like your nitty gritty, right? And that's important to keep it on the inside because we don't want to, this could get scratched, this could get damaged, this could get burned. If I'm out in the sun for too long, this will absolutely get damaged. So you don't want anything valuable or really, really important to be on that outer layer because at any point, you could just lose some of that outer layer. Cuts, scrapes, burns, stuff like that. So your mesoderm is going to have kind of like the bulk of what's going on here. This is going to be like your muscles, your bones, your structure, kind of like literally the meaty part. So you can think of the mesoderm as like the meaty part of you. And then finally, inside your endoderm, you're going to have things like very, very specific cells. Some things like your lung cells, your thyroid cells, your pancreatic cells. This is kind of like the inner lining. Especially when it comes to like the lung cells and stuff. These are going to be exposed to the outside environment. So even though they're deep, deep within us, they're still getting some kind of exposure level. So these guys right here are really, really important for pretty much all of our bodily functions, like breathing and digesting and all of those good things that we need, reproducing, like those good things happen inside. That's going to happen in that final endoderm layer. And that endoderm literally means inside. Okay, so this is our bottom layer, or inside layer, which is going to have most of our, pretty much most of our organs, besides our largest organ, the skin. All right. So moving on to nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is kind of an important one. We're going to have a whole different lecture on neurons and stuff like that. This is basically cell communication. So your body is communicating like every single second of the day. Every single cell is communicating with the following cells and the surrounding cells. And that's because we have to maintain what's called homeostasis. And we're going to talk about that later. But this is essentially a way for us to communicate. So am I too hot? Am I too cold? Am I sick? Am I hungry? Right? All of these things are basically your body's way of triggering certain types of reactions. So if I'm hungry, I'm going to trigger my stomach and be like that growly, gurgly. That's actually your stomach trying to like need food that's not there. Which is going to be like, oh, okay, I must be hungry, thirsty, same thing. Hot, you're going to start to sweat and perspire. So all these things are reactions, is basically signals that are sent via our nervous system to keep us healthy, to keep us maintained, and to keep us balanced. And we're going to go into that in greater detail coming up. But essentially, this is just basically your system of communications with little tiny things known as neurons. And we're going to talk all about neurons and the shape of neurons. And yes, you will have to determine that. But we're going to go into that in the next couple lectures. I think that's chapter 27. All right, moving on to muscle tissues. Muscle tissues, like we've already kind of mentioned, are for motion, right? Back in the day when we had to go chase down our food, this is how we were able to do it, with these wonderful use of the muscles. Okay, so muscles allow us to contract, right? These contractions allow us to do different things. And this is one thing that people don't realize. Muscles can only contract. They can't really push anything. And you're like, what are you talking about? I can totally push someone over. Right? But it's actually contraction of your muscles to get that pushing. So each of these little individual muscles, basically these little I don't want to get into the details of it. You can take anatomy if you really want to get into it. But essentially, it's like these little contracting, sliding plates that are going back and forth, and that's what's giving your arms that power to go back and forth like this. It's a simple contraction of these muscles, these overlying layers, which is pretty cool. And if you do want to go and take anatomy, it's a fantastic class. And I do teach anatomy, but not in this class. We're just simplifying, nice, easy overview of structure and function. Now, when we do talk about muscle tissue, there are 3 different types. The types I've been talking about are the skeletal muscle. This is, again, surrounding my skeleton, allowing me to move around like this. Now, there's also cardiac muscles. Those are the muscles in your heart that are actually contracting your heart. So most of your organs aren't contracting. Most of your organs aren't moving around. Like your kidney's not back there doing stuff. Of course it's doing stuff. It's filtering stuff. But is it actually like contracting back and forth? No. But our heart is, and that's very important that our heart keeps pumping. So that is a very specific type of this muscle known as cardiac muscle. Cardiac meaning heart, cardiac muscle, the pumping of our heart, the beating of our heart, the contractions of our heart, to get us our circulating fluid to make sure that we survive. And finally, the last part is going to be the smooth muscle. Now, these smooth muscles are going to be found in your digestive system, and that's to keep the food moving, right? You don't want to eat something and have it just get stuck in your small or large intestine, right? It needs to keep going. You need to get out of there. So a process known as peristalsis, we're basically just moving our food along our long digestive tract and then out the back end. So skeletal muscle used for the motions, right? Cardiac muscles used for the beating of the heart. Smooth muscles used for the digesting of the food and the moving and the passing of the food. Getting to epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is, epi means kind of on top. This is your top layer of tissue. Typically, this is going to be like your skin cells, any kind of cell that's kind of interacting with the environment is probably going to be an epithelial cell. And that's because they're really good at it. And there's also so many layers of them that they kind of make this nice, cushy, protective area where nothing foreign can just kind of invade in. So things like our skin are actually really, really great at protecting against things like bacteria, viruses. I just combined this word. Bacteria and viruses. That's what I was talking about. So we're really, really great with this nice protective layer. So that's usually what an epithelial tissue is going to be doing. It's kind of protecting, right? It's keeping us as this nice, healthy package and not letting foreign little things in. Now, we've kind of already talked about things like protecting from viruses and microbes and stuff like that. In our lungs and our throat and stuff, we have this tiny little cilia full of this mucus to catch any antibody or anti-foreign things that's floated in there. Your nose has hairs to, collect any of these foreign little antibodies. Remember those fungus spores that we learned about? You don't want fungus spores in your brain. You're going to get all crazy like that ant and shoot stuff out of your... No, all sorts of bad. So all of our orifices or our openings into our body are usually protected by something. Okay, most of the time we're in this nice big collective package because of these epithelial tissues, right? Because of these epithelial cells, we're kind of sealed in to keep our ectoderm and everything inside nice and protected in the mesoderms, etc. So yes, nice, good old epithelial tissues. Super great. Connective tissues. Connective tissues are super important. One, it literally keeps your skin to your body. That's kind of a good one, right? You don't want to just get a cut and scrape and then have the whole thing slough off. You're like, oh man, I lost all my arm tissue. My arm skin just fell off. So on the inner layer, we do have this what's called loose connective tissue, and that is, again, connecting our muscle to our skin. It is loose connective tissue because it's not really super connected. It's really not that hard to do like a skin graft and kind of like remove that skin layer. If you just, all you got to do is kind of just remove those little connective tissues. Not that I'm saying you should do this by any means or why ever you would. I'm just saying it's your skin's not that connected. All you got to do is get through that connective tissue layer. Blood is actually a connective tissue, and you're like, well, what is it connecting? Well, technically, it's connecting every part of your cell to other parts of your cells. Because when you're doing respiration in your lungs, you're doing that gas exchange, you're getting that oxygen and you're releasing that CO2, right? Every little last bit of cell in your body is going to need that oxygen. And so your connective tissues, like blood, are going to help send it all the way through every last little bit of you to make sure that everybody's getting that oxygen that they need. Bone is a connective tissue, right? We wouldn't be able to walk around and walk down the street and go run that mile if we didn't have bones. Right? So connective tissue is very important. You also have things like cartilage in your knees and your joints, anything like that. That's kind of a cushioning and a padding. Otherwise, you'd have bones just rubbing on bones. And as you get older, your cartilage does kind of deteriorate. And that's why for some older people, it is like their knees hurt and their joints hurt and stuff like that because the cartilage is basically gone. And so that cushy connective tissue that was keeping the bones apart are now gone and they're smashing into each other, which is why their joints hurt, especially when it gets cold. Adipose tissues is another one. That's a big fancy word for fat tissue, just fatty layers. But sometimes we need fatty layers, right? Insulation is great. The more you have, the less you're going to be freezing in the wintertime. Also certain cushioning and paddings and stuff like that. You know, sitting on your butt for too long, if you got a real skinny butt, sorry to say it, it's going to probably hurt a little bit. So adipose tissue is also really great for storing temporary energy and stuff like that. Remember, fat has a lot of caloric possibilities. I don't know what the word I'm trying to say here. So they do have, it's a really, really useful storage of energy. Source of energies, that's what I was looking for. It's a really useful source of energy for your body. So it does store, is it important to store fat? And finally, we have things like fibrous connective tissues that are going to form like tendons and stuff like that, which are going to help with the joints and the moving and all that locomotion stuff. Now, here are some crash course videos, and I know there's a lot of them, and I'm not going to, this is one of our last lectures, I'm not going to actually insert these videos, but I do want you to watch them. It really will kind of like help clarify the differences between all these different types of tissues, especially the two connective tissues, one, the nervous and muscle tissues, epithelial tissues. They really give you like a great insight. And the animations are amazing. Of all these different layers. So if you're interested or you're curious or really you're just learning, you want to study, go check out these links. Going to be super, super helpful. All right. Hopefully you guys really enjoyed those videos. Okay. So next up, we're going to be talking about this word that I've already mentioned, homeostasis. Now, homeostasis essentially means you're maintaining an internal environment. So that you want to keep your water balanced, you want to keep your gases balanced, you want to keep your sugars balanced. You need to keep all of these things inside your body at a nice level, like this constant internal level. Otherwise, you're going to start throwing all these different processes off. So it's really important to maintain this homeostasis to keep a healthy internal environment and a stable internal environment. That's the whole point of homeostasis, to maintain a stable, healthy environment. Internally, of course. I don't mean affecting the environment around you. That's impossible. But internally is what we're talking about. So what we see right here is these external changes. So maybe you live in the desert and at night it's very cold and in the daytime it's very hot. Okay, so if externally your temperature fluctuations are going like this in a day and internally they mimic that, your processes would be all over the place. Mind you, you're maintaining a very fine, you're kind of walking a fine line of like not dying. And that's crazy because at any point, if any one of these processes stop working, essentially you are just going to die like that, which is nuts, but we don't. Because this thing called homeostasis gets maintained by our body and we're really good at it, which is just crazy and amazing all at the same time. So despite the fact that the external environment is going through this like 32 degree temperature fluctuation in a day, and mind you, this is 32 degrees Celsius. It's a big difference. Internally, right? Internally, inside this cat right here, the temperature changes is not changing, right? They stay at a nice 38, 39 degrees Celsius, right? That's like us. We're usually about 98.7, 98.5 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. That's our internal temperature. So if you are healthy, you're going to maintain that temperature. It's only when your temperature actually starts to spike, like when you have a fever, and it's actually because that's your body trying to fight off said fever. And we're going to talk about that as well. But right now we're going to actually see this little animation on negative feedback. So like these little processes that I've been talking about are happening inside of our body millions and millions of times in a single day, maybe even billions, right? It's just happening constantly. And our body is constantly regulating some of these processes. So if you have too much sodium, it's going to work to get rid of the sodium. If you don't have enough potassium, it's going to work to increase the potassium. We're basically like playing this fine line every single day, like, oh, no, now we have enough of this. Oh, we don't have enough of that. Okay, now we're going to take some more back. Okay. So essentially, you're just kind of doing anything you can to maintain, again, this stable internal environment. And sometimes you have to go through what's called inhibition. And we learned about inhibition when we talked about enzymes. So inhibition basically means that something is coming in and stopping. So in this case, what we're looking at is these are 3 different proteins that help, or enzymes that help catalyze a reaction. And what we're going to see is this little A comes in and then turns into a C and then finally turns into, A goes from an A to a B to a C and then eventually turns into the product is D, right, through all these chemical reactions. And eventually, if your body produces enough D, then it's going to stop producing the little molecule. And that's what we're going to see right here. So let's go ahead and watch this animation right here.
This simple animation illustrates the principle of negative feedback, or feedback inhibition, in the regulation of a chemical reaction sequence in a cell. The sequence involves 4 molecules, A, B, C, and D. 3 different enzymes catalyze the conversion of one molecule to the next. The final product, D, inhibits the first enzyme in the sequence. When the concentration of D rises to a certain point, the reaction shuts itself down.
So hopefully that little animation helps you guys out with a negative feedback loop and what's going on. All right, so temperature is really important for us to regulate. When we talked about animals, we talked about how they have a very narrow range of temperature that they can actually survive in. Well, it's the same thing internally. If your internal thermoregulation gets all out of whack, all of these processes could potentially be affected negatively. And so that's not what we want. And so our body has a number of ways of regulating our temperature. So if we are at our nice point, about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, we're super happy. We're going to maintain that temperature. However, if our body temperature actually gets a little bit hot, right, above that 98.7 threshold, 98.6 degree threshold, what's going to happen is our control center in our brains are actually going to activate these cooling mechanisms. So what's going to happen is our sweat glands are actually going to get triggered by this blood vessel dilation and this sweat that's going to get produced. So we're triggering our sweat glands to actually start producing this sweat by basically these hormones in our brain are like, all right, send the signal, start sweating. That water is actually going to bask our skin, and remember, water can absorb a lot of heat before any temperature actually gets changed. So it's a great insulator. So we're actually going to get a lot of that heat removed off our skin because of the sweat. So if you're working out, or if you have a temp or fever or anything like that, you actually start sweating as a way of cooling your body down, a natural way of cooling your body down. So it's a good thing to sweat. In fact, if you actually have heat stroke and you're so hot that you stop sweating, that's when you have to go to the emergency room, because you could potentially have heat stroke and die. But normally heat exhaustion is just, oh, I'm sweating. You just take a minute, drink some water, sit in the shade, cool off. Because that's your body letting you know you need to cool down. So again, your body temperature is too hot. What's going to happen is your vessels are going to dilate. It's going to send a bunch of blood flow through there. The sweat glands are going to get triggered to actually start producing sweat. And then your body temperature is going to start to drop thanks to that sweat, that heat absorption, and the water. Now, when the body temperature gets a little bit too low, your brain is going to do the same thing, but in reverse. Now we're actually going to start warming ourselves up. So we're actually going to start heating our body up. So in this case, our blood vessels are going to constrict, and our what's going to happen is your muscles are going to start to shiver right here, and that shivering is actually going to cause an increase in your metabolism or your metabolic rate, and then it's going to increase your temperature. So your metabolic rate is going to increase, and so is your temperature. Again, trying to maintain and keep you right here at this nice set point of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, when you do have a fever, this is an indication that you are sick. There's an indication that your homeostasis is off and that some kind of infection has happened and your body is now trying to fight that. Now, most people think the virus or the bacteria itself causes the fever, meaning you get it and it causes your body to get all hot. And that's actually not the case. What actually really happens is the temperature increase is actually your body's way of maintaining your immune system. So it's basically going, oh, we need to call out the forces, call the troops, and send the immune system. So when it increases your body temperature, it increases all these things to get your immune system going, to kick it into gear. Now, even just a slight increase, and even a couple degrees, can actually decrease bacterial growth and increase your immune system. So even just, I have a fever of 100, 102, stuff like that, not going to kill you, but it is going to increase your immune system. It's going to get your immune system working. It's going to send those white blood cells out to start killing things. Now, anything higher than 102, especially around 104, remember, that's when your proteins start breaking down and their structure starts unraveling, and that is all sorts of bad. So if you're at 104, you need to get into an ice bath or to an emergency room quickly, because that is dangerous. But before that, this is just your body's natural response, triggering your immune system and decreasing the type of bacterial growth that can actually survive in those temperatures. So, good things. Now, we also have to do this when it comes to water, right? So it's not just temperature that we have to maintain, a constant level of, but it's water as well. So this is called osmoregulation. So the regulation of water. Like thermoregulation is the regulation of temperature. This is now osmoregulation. The regulation of water is what it is. So basically, we want to maintain a certain water concentration. And we learned all through this when we were talking about our osmosis lecture. So hopefully you guys remember back to then. If not, you can always go back and rewatch it. So when it comes to osmoregulation, it's going to kind of depend on your outside environment. Now, we need to keep fresh water coming in because we don't have any way else to get water. Okay, if you live in an aquatic environment like we learned about in chapter 20, then you actually kind of need to maintain your water. And you're like, wait a minute, what about a freshwater fish? Well, freshwater fish has plenty of fresh water. In fact, too much fresh water. So that fresh water is constantly kind of influxing into the cells. Remember, simple diffusion, we go from a high concentration to a low concentration. The lake is high, the fish is low. Right? It's going to go into the fish. Potentially, the fish could swell up and... Right? So the fish, that freshwater fish, is actually going to need to maintain a way to get rid of all of its excess water. But it needs salt. So in this case, it's going to drink lots of fresh water. It's going to keep whatever salt is there because your body needs salt, like sodium. Right? And then it's just going to constantly be peeing. Like, freshwater fish just pee all the time. Think about that the next time you try to go into a stream or a river or a lake. There's pee. But it's like really, really diluted water. So it's coming out just essentially the same. Just water. Now, saltwater fish are the opposite problem. Yeah, they're surrounded by water, but it's salty water. So essentially, they're getting all this extra salt and they're losing their fresh water. So what they need to do is they need to take in that salt water and then they need to get rid of the salt while keeping that little bit of fresh water that's there. So they're doing the opposite of the fresh water. They're not peeing hardly at all. And when they do, it's like super concentrated and it's all salt. So they're just like, get rid of that salt. I need the fresh water. The little bit of fresh water that I have. But I don't need all this excess salt. So get rid of that excess salt. So it's the same kind of general concept, but depending on what kind of environment you live in, you're either going one way or the other. Now, we lose water all the time, right? Which is why we need it to keep coming in, because we're going to sweat it out, we're going to urinate it out, we're going to do all sorts of things to get rid of it, right? But we need to constantly keep taking it in. So eating and drinking fresh water is very, very important. In fact, you can last, I forget how long it is. I think it's like 2 weeks or something without food, but it's like 3 days without water. Like, you just can't last. All of your cells, remember, are mostly water. And therefore, you constantly need to keep keep that water coming in. So drink your water, guys. It's very, very important. This is a little video on osmoregulation in freshwater fishes if you actually want to see how it's done. This is a little great one. Again, I'm not going to give it in this little lecture, but if you want to go see it, there's a link for you right there. Other than that, I will say thank you guys for another lecture. We're almost done with the semester. Stay strong. We're really, really close. The lecture's a little shorter today, but that's because you got all those videos to go watch. So I did not include them, but go watch them. It will help you, I swear. And they're entertaining. And, what else are you going to do? We're all locked inside anyway. So anyway, have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you guys very shortly. And we're almost done with the semester. So cheers to you guys.